We're here for episode 2 of Essential Practice. And Essential Practice is essentially playing with recordings. That's how I practice. And so this session is designed to just illustrate how I go about practicing in order to strengthen my improvisational capacity. And it's definitely something that you should all be doing to some extent. It's all I do in my practice regimen. I don't do any technicals or long tones or scales or anything like that. But if you're learning the instrument, you have to spend some time doing those things. But it's a good idea to dedicate at least a portion of your practice sessions to playing with things that you like the sound of and trying to mimic what you're hearing. I might as well pull something up here. Let's see. I'm focusing on Canadian indie artists for a couple of reasons. One is I don't want to encroach on copyrights, or worse yet, have a cyberbot take my live stream down. But also, we have some fantastic musicians in this country that in some cases are unbeknownst to the rest of the world. So it gives me an opportunity to celebrate some of their great workmanship. So the first thing that I've called up here is, let's see, it's by a great sort of blues singer, soul singer. Mary McKay is her name, but she goes under the moniker Queen Pepper now. Queen Pepper. And this is from her first album entitled True Stories. And it's, I don't know which cut it is, I've set it aside here, but it's entitled Leave It on the Dance Floor. So we'll see what happens. All right. I've got some volume. I should be okay. Here we go.
If you think you can dance, then show me what to do. Leave it on the dance floor. Leave it on the dance floor. Are you gonna dance? Yeah, 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 yeah. Are you gonna move your body? Just like this. Are you ready to let go? Please wanna let go. leave it all on the dance floor. Battle dance, classic dance, feeling music over short fuse days and in the holidays. Leave it all on the dance floor. Feeling down, overwhelmed, overworked, underpaid. If today was a really bad day, leave it all on the dance floor. Battle dance, classic dance, feeling music over short fuse days and in the holidays. Leave it all on the dance floor. Hey.
I guess that's the next track. Okay, so what was going on there? The first thing I might point out is that she's singing that in the key of B, pardon me, B, which has, I believe it's got a lot of accidentals. And I'm teasing you a bit because it does have a lot of accidentals. Something that's really important in developing your improvisational skills is learning to get comfortable in all key areas. Because even standard tunes in more conventional keys, they can migrate to difficult keys, even if it's just for a couple of bars or a phrase. So there comes a point when you really have to be fluent in every key area because you never know which one is going to crop up. And then of course if you're playing with singers, often they're choosing keys that work for their range, and they don't really care what key it is as long as their voice sits properly, which means the onus is on the sidemen or you as a horn player to do obligatos in unusual key areas and maybe even on standard tunes. In any case, there's a way of going about this, and I wish I'd learned it a little sooner, but I'll let you know now. This is especially important for classical players, but it applies to jazz players or people that are interested in improvising as well. When you're practicing scales and arpeggios, don't look at a chart or music or have a script of the scale. Find out what the notes are, and then get them under your fingers, and then forget about the key signature completely. And just work the sensation of playing the scale. Because you want to get to the point where, oh, B major feels like this. Digitally, not in your heart and your soul. It just, physically, it feels like this. It sounds a little strange, but practice without music and forget the key signature. You might have to think about those things first, but once you've got this thing under your fingers, then start to address how does it feel and imprint that on your brain. And the beauty of that is you'll reach a point where the key signature doesn't matter. It's not a point of potential confusion or a possible burden. It's just a distinguishing feature because you're not thinking about it. You're going, oh, I'm in the key of D, and it feels like this. Okay, I know that sounds a little advanced, but it actually explains something that Charlie Parker once said, which was basically learn everything you can about the horn, and then when you go out and play, forget it, sort of thing, and just play. That's easy for Charlie Parker to say because he put in some serious time, but it doesn't enable us lesser folks to try and figure out, well, how do you get from that point A to this accomplished point B? So there are things that you can do, and notably what I was just suggesting about how you approach your scales and your arpeggios. And the idea is, don't use music, and get them under your fingers very, very slowly and precisely, and then once you know what the notes are, you've got them under your fingers, then forget about the key signature and just think in terms of, I'm in this key area, and this is what it feels like. Okay, I wish I'd learned that myself some time ago. Let me see what else I can say there. That kind of music that we just heard is very groovy, and she actually stays in the key area primarily. She might go to the minor, the relative minor G sharp now and again. I don't really know. I don't think about these things too much. I just sort of follow my ear. And it's amazing what you can do after a while without knowing what you're doing. But one thing, she's in the key area of B, and it's melodically quite and harmonically quite simple. So I'm using a lot of just a B major pentatonic there. So that would be. So the bulk of my note choices are gravitating around the B major pentatonic. And actually, in a piece like this, even though she's a really great soul singer, and that's her forte, this tune is a little different. It's very major and happy sounding. And invoking a blues scale, which I tried to do there in a couple of spots, it actually doesn't quite work. So you have to always be mindful of your context. So it's a very major-oriented thing, then the major pentatonic will work. If it's more dominant sounding or minor sounding, then of course the blues scale will work perfectly. And the fact of the matter is, the blues scale is a pretty amazing scale. It'll fit in major and minor if you're crafty enough. So it's sort of a simultaneously major-minor melodic device. All right. Is there anything else I should say about that? Sometimes, just the way you phrase, and I'll play a little bit maybe, and I want you to notice a few things. First of all, the very, very careful placement of the quarter beats. They line up precisely with the rhythm section, precisely. And also the use of short notes. And if I use short notes, they are really short. And also the fact that I'm not necessarily accenting a lot. Sometimes just the brevity of the note will do the trick. And certainly in that tune, there was a point there where she kind of switched into rap. So what I did was just to answer her in kind, I sort of played a little more staccato and tried to match the pulse in her line. And I didn't care about whether I'm playing exactly what she's singing. I was just trying to get the shape and the contour and the flavor of it. That's it. That's all. That's good enough. And that can be a challenge for your ear, just that much. So let me play a bit of it. And also I want you to notice that I'm not necessarily demarcating the beginning of every phrase. I sometimes let the band do that, because it's sort of interesting how it sounds. And maybe I'll give you a body motion to show you where I'm pulling back and letting the band play, where most people would play the downbeat of the phrase because they feel it has to be done. Well, sometimes just pulling back on that one aspect of the music can sort of make it snap. It's sort of an interesting phenomenon. So let me just go back and pick a little bit of this. It's just in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Are you gonna move your body just like this? Are you ready to let go? Are you gonna let go?
That wasn't very good because I was starting in the middle of a phrase there. I didn't feel right. So I'll just start. I'll just restart. Just bear with me.
We're gonna dance tonight. We're gonna dance tonight. Away. We're gonna dance tonight. We're gonna dance tonight. Away. We're gonna dance tonight. We're gonna dance tonight. Away.
That wasn't necessarily very great. It was a little forced, but you can see what I was trying to do. Like you can hear the short notes are really short. I'm trying to get the quarter beats to really line up with the pulse carefully, and when I was jumping there, often I was backing off from a downbeat, an obvious point which most people would play, but it's very groovy because it kind of levitates the music if you just leave it alone. So sometimes playing less will work wonders for you. And as I often say, if you're in doubt about what to do at any point in time when you're playing, and you have the option of playing or not playing, probably not playing is the better option. So just take a moment and reflect or think a little bit, or just wait to get back into the groove. Okay, maybe I'll take another track here. This is by a very excellent vocalist. She's a Juno Award winner. She's really well known in Canada. She's very kind of established, and so she's been remarkable since childhood, virtually. She came from good stock. Both of her parents were accomplished musicians, doing studio work here in Toronto. But her name is EMILIE-CLAIRE BARLOW, and I had the good fortune actually to work with her for 2 or 3 years. I've been on a few of her albums, dressing tracks, and I was in the band for a while when she had a 3-horn section, which was a very interesting one, consisting of tenor saxophone, who plays on this track, Kelly Jefferson, an outstanding trumpeter, William Sperandi, and then flute, me on the flute. So it's an unusual combination, tenor, trumpet, and flute, but it was just being in the section was great. Forget about the solos and all that stuff. The section was just fantastic, playing with those guys. And it's an interesting combination to put a nice point on Emily's, work, the stuff in the background. So this is something from sort of like a new format or a new group for her that she calls Bocana. And this is something where she collaborates with her mate, Steve Webster, who's essentially a bass player, but he does a bunch of other things. He's had a big hand in this track as well. And I don't think this is on an album yet. I think it's sort of a single release. But it's her latest thing, and it's called Stumpy's on the Loose Again. So it's not from an album that I can cite. It's by Bocana, which is Bocana, and it's called Stumpy's on the Loose Again. Stumpy. All right, let's see what I can do here. This may be a little more swing oriented. We'll see. Here we go.
Stumpy's on the loose again.
Stumpy's on the loose, they drove him away. When without a fight, didn't feel
Okay. So that's, once again, that's Emilie-Claire Barlow singing Stumpy's on Loose Again. And that's actually, I think, her latest oeuvre. Really, really kind of spooky track. I like it. And that's courtesy of both Emilie and her mate Steve Webster and their unit called Bocana. That happened to be in the key of A minor, and it went to some odd chords there that I don't think I really necessarily pinned that well. When in doubt, invoke a 5 function. Often that's a good shorthand rule of thumb, because any 5 function, the 5 function is a point of high dissonance in any progression. And what this means is you can kind of get away with murder. There's so many possibilities that many will work, and even if they don't fit perfectly, they still sort of sparkle, and they have something to do with that dissonant point in the phrase. So they'll sound okay even if they're not exactly right. So I think I was relying on that principle in part there. That was pretty relaxed. It's a nice track, and I like it just for that reason. I had a question from somebody. Let me just go to my screen here. A woman from Amsterdam. I don't know if she's tuning in or not, but in any event, she was asking me about bending notes. And it's sort of a tough question, for me anyway. So this goes out to Sasha Kofert from Amsterdam, who's asking me how to bend notes. I might have done some in that track, but it's not something I think of very consciously. I tend to play the instrument in a pretty legitimate, orthodox way, although I've had to modify my technique to make it work in non-classical situations. So there's a number of things that are happening on fundamentally 3 dimensions: vibrato, articulation, and breathing, notably. I had to modify those things to make them work in non-classical situations. So if I just take one, vibrato, much less vibrato overall. Almost none in most, in many, if not most, circumstances. And then I'll invoke it in different ways, in terms of both the speed or the pace, and also the amplitude. So it can be light or heavy, or fast or slow, or I might change the speed of it. And sometimes I might use it as a bit of a sting. And I think I probably did that in this track in spots where I'll suddenly hit a note and deliberately kind of give it a shake or a twist. All of those are things that I do as opposed to conscientiously bending notes. And if your air column is fluctuating, that will help to give a semblance of bending the notes even when you aren't trying to. However, I know I've heard myself bend notes from time to time, so I know I do it. But it's very intuitive and it's very organic. So I don't do it in a sort of a very premeditated way. Nonetheless, I can tell you a little bit about how I would go about it, or what might be going on when that happens. First of all, getting a note to bend, it's probably, here's some basic principles that probably apply in almost every instance where I might bend a note, or anybody else for that matter. First of all, it's easier to bend down than up. And usually it's funkier to bend down than up. Up is kind of, and somebody might think, oh, you're going out of tune. If you go down, well, the ear is much more accepting of that. Plus, it sort of intimates, say, the blues, and the blues guys are doing that all the time. So the first thing is, if you're going to bend, usually it's a better idea to bend down rather than to bend up. So the first thing that I might do physically, because that's a choice in terms of direction, the first thing is change the air column, and that might mean pushing it or pulling it a little bit, and if you're bending down, more likely pulling it. But I might want to emphasize the bend, even if I'm going down, in which case now it becomes just rolling the instrument in a little bit. See, I can't even do it if it's not in context. I have trouble doing it because I don't practice that. I don't really. Maybe I'll try a little bit with this track and deliberately try and bend and see what I can come up with. The other thing I might mention too is that, and maybe I should have mentioned this first or earlier, certain areas of the instrument lend themselves to being bent more than others. So it might be tricky, say, to bend the high end of the instrument. It's a little easier to bend the mid-range or the lower range. So that's another thing that my body tells me to do intuitively. Like, don't try and bend up there. You're just asking for trouble. Be down in the mid-range or lower range for that purpose. The other thing is I have a feeling that open keys, open fingerings, are a little easier to bend than closed ones. So that's another thing. It'll depend on the key area and where I am in the line, and if I hear a bend or it just happens, but it'll gravitate probably towards open key fingerings as opposed to closed key fingerings. There are people that do this very well. Like I've seen some flamenco players. For example, Jorge Pardo, fantastic. And he does a lot of bending. Jorge Pardo was the flautist with Paco de Lucia for years. Fabulous player. And he bends notes a lot, and if you watch him, you can see it. I mean, he's actually kind of bobbing his heads, and the amplitude of his bends is quite large. They tend to be shorter and a little more idiomatic because it's flamenco, so it's a slightly different sense of the bend, but he's bending but good. Let me see if I just play a little bit of Emily's track. See if I can try some bends, and let me just summarize what I'm doing to help out Sasha and those of you that are curious, because as I say, I just don't intellectualize this stuff. I don't use a lot of effects. But the first thing is it's easier to bend down than up. It will be easier to bend in the lower portion of the instrument, i.e. not in the top, the third register, but first, second, and maybe a bit of the third, I don't know. Also, open fingerings probably lend themselves a little more to bends than closed ones. That's not an absolute, but likely. And then, of course, if you want to bend a note, you're usually bearing down on the tone hole. So, and you can do that just by tilting your head, and it's that simple. And is there anything else I can say? You might want to fuss with the wind a little bit. Sometimes I like to lighten up, but then if you lighten up, it's going to draw the pitch up, so you have to bear down more. These are all little subtle things that are taking place all at once. So in short, there's a lot of factors that can come into play in order to bend a note effectively, and especially if it's going to be organic and sort of have something to do with the music, because you don't want it to be like some little device you're resorting to. You want it to emerge naturally. So at the risk of being unnatural, I'll take Emily's track and maybe try and bend a few notes and see what happens. So here she is. I'm going to try and pick some point after the tenor solo so Kelly and I aren't colliding with each other. Whoopsies. There he is. Kelly, get out of my way. Okay, let's see.
No, we don't want you'd come around
So I was bending a little bit there, and one thing I forgot to mention, of course, is you can do a certain amount of this with your fingers. And the strange thing is you might feel that, oh, you need an open hole flute to do this. No, you can do it with a closed hole flute. Makes no difference. In fact, I don't. To me, I don't care if a flute's open or closed hole. It makes no difference to me, even as a jazz player. I can do whatever I want with a closed hole. So what that means is that it's your technique and how you're opening the keys, and that's kind of a weird thing to describe. You have to wrap your body around it a bit. But there's definitely it's hard to just do a bend in the middle of nowhere. It's easier for me to do it in context. But all I'm saying is that just to summarize on bending notes, the main thing is bend down as opposed to up. Probably the lower end of the instrument, and when I say it doesn't have to be the bottom, but just the lower end, the first couple of registers and plus a little bit. It tends to work better with open fingerings, but that's not a bar against closed fingerings. You want to sometimes pull back on the wind, but that's going to sharpen things, which means you have to bear down, and that's typically what you're doing anyway. You're really, and that means tilting the flute into your mouth a bit. I tilt my head or whatever. And finally, the digital stuff has something to do with it. But your digits are fickle things, and I notice myself sometimes things don't happen the way I wanted them to or what I was intending to do. I try not to ever let that, in fact, I just don't let that worry me. If you worry about that kind of thing as you're playing, it's going to show because you're going to stop and start and choke, and you don't want to be doing that. You want to keep an ebb and a flow in your work. So that means you've got to have lots of technique. Develop your technique as well as you can beforehand, but don't let it interrupt your concentration when you're actually playing. Because sometimes a bend might not work as well as I intended, but maybe the fingers were happening. And so it comes off sort of as a bend, or it just comes off okay, even if it wasn't exactly what I intended. So fingers can have something to do with bends as well. All right, I think I've exhausted that one. I hope Sasha Kofert will forgive me over there in Amsterdam for spending so much time on bending notes, which I don't do much or perhaps even very well at that. All right, what we might do, I'll just look at my screen again here. I'm supposed to be able to see people. I don't see anybody. Because I should acknowledge the presence of a few, if I can. While another tab is opening, there's another piece that I wanted to do here, and this is very different, again, from the first two. The first was kind of a happy soul funk thing, although major-oriented. And the second one was that really slow groove, kind of swing, and this one's going to be much more Brazilian in flavor. I'm seeing some people here. Let's see. Sasha Kofert, she's there. That's great. Hi, Sasha. So if I just single her out, that's fine. I really appreciate the rest of you being there as well. And Sasha just had the presence of mind to put that question to me in writing before the live stream. So all right. So the third track that I plan on looking at here is by a woman from Sudbury, Northern Ontario town, Sunbury, I think it's a mining town, um, and it's very remote kind of thing. It's probably not that big, um, but she's a very, very talented vocalist. Um, and she sings in several languages, um, English, Portuguese, Spanish. Um, there's a well-known indigenous artist that caught on to her, and he relies on her for all of his shows. I'm drawing a blank on his name. Livingston? Oh, my apologies. Anyway, Patricia is the focus here. Patricia Cano is her name. Cano. And she's done a couple of outstanding albums. And this is from her first album. Patricia is also very smart because she collaborates with some also extraordinarily talented musicians, notably her guitarist and co-writer. Patricia tends to write the lyrics, and her co-writer, Carlos Bernardo, writes typically the music, and he's also a guitar player. He probably does a bunch of other things too. But Carlos is a guitarist, composer, who is originally from Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, but he now lives in Paris. He lives in France, and he comes to Canada now and again because he has some connections here, certainly with Patricia and a couple of other really good Portuguese musicians that you may not know about. Luis Mao, for one. Anyway, Carlos is a great player, great guy, and he's actually quite singular. You know, he's very striking in terms of what he does technically and how he thinks musically. That's he's quite remarkable. So Patricia's been very fortunate to run into this guy, and he seems to be very happy to be collaborating with her quite extensively on both of Patricia's albums. So this is one cut from her album that is entitled Fall Into Me, and it's from her album This Is the New World. So Patricia Cano, Fall Into Me, with Carlos Bernardo on guitar, and another excellent musician here in town who has played a pretty big role in Patricia's albums is Lucito Orbegoso, who's a percussionist, singer, trombone player, writer, arranger, engineer. I mean, he's an absolute phenom. And very authentic at Cuban and Brazilian idioms. Anyway, Luis Orbegoso is also has a pretty big hand probably in this track. So here we go, Falling Into Me by Patricia Cano. That's pretty relaxed. Here we go. Whoops, sorry. Set that back. What key are we in? E flat, okay. Not bad. I'm just going to take another run at it. last chord was. It sounded like a little like a. I want to find out now. Was it a D?
Stumpy's on the loose again.
Let me just find it. What was that? Maybe it was an augmented chord. I don't know. Who cares? I got to the end. Let me just call you up again. So that was the third track that I thought I'd spend a little time on. On that one, I definitely played, pardon me, far too much. I was doing far more there than I would ordinarily do in an actual dressing situation. And also, I handled the time in a pretty plastic way, and I might be inclined to be a little more metric if I were actually dressing the track. I'd have to see. But that's how I felt for that thing. I sort of was all over the map. Sometimes it's nice to sort of avoid the downbeats and the time and just sort of, what's that word, like a bird, sort of soar in and around it. And if you're going to do that, what's interesting is it's not entirely random because, for example, your time, even though it's kind of against the meter, has to be even so it does float. It's not going to fit precisely because that's the whole idea. You don't want it to, but you want it to have some elegance and levity, and the only way that's going to happen is if where you're placing your time is very even and precise, just like where the band is, and that's what makes it sort of gives this kind of like, what, oh, what's going on? I feel like I'm being lifted. So that's something I might say about the way I approached that track. As I say, I played too much. I was sort of trying to play some of the stuff the muted trumpet was doing during the solo. Oh, that's what I was going to say. I wasn't really, yeah, I wasn't necessarily playing with the track. When the muted trumpet came on, I actually thought, you know, the flute timbre and the harmon mute might kind of conflict. So I just decided, okay, I'm going to play a little closer to the trumpet, maybe try and mimic him. Because often today I'm just improvising. I'm sort of extemporizing a good deal. And really, when you're doing this, you should be trying to match something that you're hearing and match it precisely. So, for example, during the trumpet solo, I started to try and play what he was playing. And the other thing when you're doing this in your practice sessions is not to stress out about being perfect, because certainly when you begin, you'll make tons of mistakes. That's the way it is. Just accept that. It almost feels like torture at first, and you don't want to hear yourself. But the idea is to just get your sense of humility in place and sharpen your ears and try and play something that you have heard as closely as possible. And even if it's just a little bit, or a shape or a contour or a nuance, just try and get something, because you will get better at it. That's for sure. I mean, that's been my case. And I never get anything absolutely right. It doesn't matter, because that's the nature of improvisation. As soon as you start, you know, there's the prospect of things not going according to plan. That's the nature of it. So you don't let that upset your temperament as you proceed with the undertaking. Okay, where are we at? I think that's about 50 minutes. I don't like to spend too long because everyone gets exhausted, eh? So maybe I'll leave it at that. Those are 3 very nice tracks. I have them documented below if you wanted to track them down. But they were Queen Pepper first, then EMILIE-CLAIRE, who was the soul R&B type piece, EMILIE-CLAIRE Barlow, who was that spooky, relaxed swing thing, and then PATRICIA Cano with the essentially a very, very relaxed. I don't know if it's strictly speaking a bossa, but it sort of implied that. And then me, of course, ranting and raving on the flute and separate and apart. All right, so that's about it for now. I don't really have a charge or a fee for these things, but what I encourage people to do, if they're inclined to compensate me in any way, is just buying a CD, is or two is a good gesture, or my book. Here's the book. Everything's in here. The Technique and Theory of Improvisation, which has been getting excellent reviews, selling very well. I'm really happy with it, actually. And as for CDs, I've got about 8 of them out. Here's the latest one, and this one is actually up for a Juno. It's called Silent Wish. I'm really pleased with all of my CDs, but this is the latest one, which happens to be up for a Juno, and it's not really a vanity piece, but my wife had a lot to do with it, and I'll leave it at that. You can read the liner notes, and you can get the whole story. Okay, I think that's about it for now, and I hope I haven't stressed anybody out too much, including me, and that maybe you've gleaned something from both the practicing or performing, as it were, and just some of the things I've had to say in response to what I was trying to do as I was going along. And that's it for now. So I really appreciate your listening and your patronage. Perhaps to be continued. We'll see. Thanks very much, folks. Bye-bye.